somos guerreiras, dos rios somos guardiães. Das terras somos guerreiras, dos rios somos guardiães. Pinturas fundo da alma, na pele de uma vilã. Pinturas fundo da alma, na pele.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining the second session of our climate finance dialogues. In today's session, we'll be trying to tackle the challenges and lessons and opportunities that some of our partners have experienced with engaging with climate finance within the VCA. And just to kick off the session and to get us all started, I'm just going to go through a little bit of housekeeping for the session. So please do ensure that your Zoom tag has your name and organization. So if you've joined using a link of a colleague or a friend, please rename yourself on Skype. You just have to press the three buttons or whatever, more when you click on your name, and then rename your name to your name and your organization's name. And then please ensure that you are on mute to avoid disruption when others are speaking. I'll go to the next slide, please. And in terms of engagement, we ask you to please put all your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat box below. If you'd like to make a comment, please also do that in the chat box. Or you can also raise your digital hand to be part of the Q&A discussion. We will be having a fishbowl discussion later on in the session where we will ask you to raise your hand, and with each hand that's raised, we'll flag that hand, and that will keep you on a list to kind of rotate all of you around when we get to the fishbowl discussion. And next slide, thank you. Then in terms of interpretation, we have provided interpretation services for English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Indonesian Bahasa. Please feel free to speak in any of these languages. And a reminder to click on at the bottom, you will see there is like a world icon. To click on that icon, that is the interpretation channel, and click the channel that applies to the language that you would like to listen and speak in. And this is also a reminder that all English listeners and speakers would have to join the English channel on the interpretation channel. If you're on the main channel, you won't be able to hear any interpretation or when anything is interpreted into English. And then for Zoom technical support, please send a message or chat to us to the host in the chat box, or you can send an email to info.vca@southsouthnorth.org. Thank you, Corinne. And that's the housekeeping for the first session. At the end of the session, we might have a poll where you can tell us how you've experienced the first two sessions. And we look forward to a very great discussion. And I'll just hand over to my colleague, Michal, to take over the rest of the session. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lesego. And welcome everybody to the second session where we will be taking a deeper dive into what climate finance means, particularly for those organizations working on the ground. And we will be revisiting two of the case studies that we looked at the first session, in which we used the case studies to demonstrate two different forms of climate finance. And so today we'll visit them again, but to dig a little bit deeper into what they mean for participants who might be similarly positioned and interested in pursuing not only the access to climate finance of this type, but maybe also to understand how best to advocate for greater accessibility of climate finance. Can I have the next slide, please, Corinne? I'm just seeing, I think I might have the wrong screen showing. I think I'm looking at where the timer will be pinned, which is not helpful. Where is the apologies? Just getting my screens organized here. There we go. Thank you. Corin, if you wouldn't mind going back one slide, please. I was looking at the wrong one. There we go. Okay, so the agenda for today, we will begin by just having a recap of those two case studies and that distinction between international and domestic sources of climate finance. And then we'll proceed to hear from the beneficiaries of those two case study projects. We'll begin by hearing from Lorna Dax from the Namibian CBNRM project that was implemented with the Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia. And then we'll hear a bit more from Kennedy Odada, who joined us last week, as well as two of the individuals working at the ground level and beneficiaries of the Kenyan County Climate Change Fund project, and that's Mr. Sam Mwenda and George Mutunga. So we'll be hearing from each of them. And then after they give us their insights into the challenges and their experience of climate finance, we'll have 30 minutes to engage together in what we're calling a fishbowl discussion. And this is a chance for everyone on the call, should you wish, to ask questions and for the presenters to ask one another questions and to move the conversation forward. So if you have questions throughout, you can post those in the meantime in the chat, the Q&A function, in the Q&A box. And if they're easy to answer, we'll pop an answer in that. But if you're wanting to engage directly with the participants and the presenters, we will make it possible for you to raise your hand during your virtual hand during the fishbowl discussion, and we will allocate you an opportunity to ask your question and to join the discussion. And we will cycle people in and out of that discussion. And then thereafter, we'll be hearing from our key listeners. These are individuals who we've asked to join today's call and to listen in specifically for insights that they are hoping will be able to add to today's discussion from their experience. And so once we hear back from them, we will be able to, I guess, feel like we've had a very broad discussion, but it's also brought in a lot of very specific perspectives on this issue of climate finance and what it means for organizations working on the ground at the forefront of the climate challenge. And just to close the session today, we will wrap up with a poll where we will gather some feedback and maybe think a little bit about what the way forward would look like. Apologies. So just to move on to our next slide, I'll be introducing some of the key listeners who have joined us today, and to make sure that I don't miss any of them. I think so far we have joining us. Let me get to my communications on this. So I think do we have Julius Mbatia from the ACT Alliance on the call with us? Julius, if you're here, we're welcoming you, and we'll hear from you later. And I think we've got Faith Lumonia from Akina Mamawa Africa. And I think that's all of the key listeners we've got for the moment. If we have any others join, we'll keep you up to date. So we can please move on to the next slide. All right, I'm going to give us a brief recap on one of the forms of climate finance that we spoke about last week, the last session, and that's the international climate finance. Now, I think the one thing we can all take away from the last session and the very thorough introduction to this complex space as given to us by our colleague Collins is just how complicated international climate finance is. It's a space that is filled with a variety of actors, all positioned at different levels, from the funds themselves that are managed centrally and globally. They trickle down into regional levels and then to the national level. And then from the national level, the funds distribute towards projects. But accessing the funds is not straightforward. It's not something that can easily be achieved by organizations on the ground. One usually cannot apply directly for finance from these international climate finance bodies, such as the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and the Global Environmental Facility, just to name a few. But instead, it's necessary for on-the-ground actors to work through a variety of national role players. At times, these role players are government entities who are fulfilling the role of intermediary between the international climate finance funds and the local level projects. But often these intermediaries are not government organizations, but instead are organizations that have as their mandate the duty to distribute climate finance, and that these organizations are in essence new to this job, as international climate finance is such a new space. And so they're kind of finding their feet, which increases the complexity because it's not a space in which the practices and the processes are well experienced. They're still evolving. And so with all of this complexity in mind, it's important that that those who are able to access climate finance through these intermediaries at the local level are able to learn and adapt quite quickly from what they've learned, so that others in the country can take from those lessons and apply them to maximize the ability to access this form of climate finance. The other interesting distinction to make in international climate finance is the distinction between funds that are made available as grants, in which there is no expectation that the money is paid back to the fund, and those usually flow towards projects in which there isn't a very clear revenue generating model. So the projects don't have necessarily a way in which they are generating any form of profit. And then on the other hand, you have funds that are made available as loans and what is known as concessionary loans, because although they are a loan and there is an expectation that the loan is paid back, the interest rate that's charged on those loans is significantly less than what would ordinarily be charged if this form of funds were accessed from commercial lenders. And so for that reason, the loans are known as concessional loans. So for organizations on the ground, this is an important distinction to make, because one would look to use and apply for funds that are made available as a grant when there's not a clear profit-making mechanism in the project. And on the other hand, where there is an ability to fund a business, let's say, then it's usually in the form of a loan. Now, all of this finance, as I say, comes from the international level, where these bodies are sourcing finance from developed countries under their obligations, under the evolving frameworks around managing climate change internationally, and then trickling down, although very slowly, down to the local level. And the project beneficiaries are having to put together proposals and apply for this funding. but it's no easy feat, and it takes up to maybe 3 years to have a project approved. If we can change the slide, please. Moving on to domestic climate finance, or in other words, a form of climate finance that isn't accessed through these international bodies directly, but instead is accessed through the government's fiscal framework, through the government's budgeting process, either through special budgets that are set aside by government at the national level for projects that will be having some kind of climate benefit, or these would be devolved funds that are coming from the national level, but are accessed through the local level mechanisms such as municipal budgets or municipal climate change funds. Now, the source of this finance in the government budget could come from taxes, but it could also come from any special arrangements or special provision of funds that is made bilaterally from an international partner and perhaps a developed country partner who through a partnership with the government is making those funds available and can be applied for. So in that case, the project beneficiaries don't need to go through one of the intermediaries as in international climate finance, and the projects are not approved at the international level, but instead the project beneficiaries access the funds through their local government or through a national government department, and the funds are approved by national government or through Treasury. So this form of climate finance or domestic climate finance is also known as devolved climate finance, when it devolves from the Treasury level, from the national budget, down to local level access. And that was the case in the Kenyan county climate change fund example we heard from. So with that refresher, I'm going to hand over to one of the beneficiaries of international climate finance, and that is one of the beneficiaries of the Environmental Investment Fund of Namibia's project, in which they accessed funds from the Green Climate Fund. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Lorna and ask that our team in the back end please show Lorna's presentation so that we can hear from Lorna, a beneficiary in one of the conservancies who is a beneficiary of this project. So Lorna, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Lorna Dax. I am the former manager for one of the beneficiary conservancies through the Green Climate Fund EIF project. I am from the Kwadinghuas Conservancy. Next slide, please. So our project objective through the Empower to Adapt Green Climate Fund project was to enhance community adaptation through climate-friendly integrations and to promote climate-resilient livelihoods in the three conservancies, namely the Dorongavas Conservancy, the Kwadinghuas Conservancy, and the Korekorep Conservancy, which are all located in the Kunene region of Namibia. Next slide. So our project was a joint application to the Environmental Investment Fund, and all three conservancies were represented by the Project Management Committee. The Project Management Committee for this specific project was nominated and sent to represent their respective conservancies by their management committees at their conservancy level. Next slide. So the achievements we had under the project was we were able to rehabilitate water points at 12 farms within the three conservancies. So each of the three conservancies identified 3 farms where the water points would be rehabilitated. And we had 12 water points rehabilitated in total, where we built protection walls around dams. And also we changed from diesel pumped water to solar pumped water points in those conservancies. Another leg for the project was we introduced poultry farming within the conservancies. So we have distributed chicken to the farmers within these conservancies. And through the poultry farming project, we had 48 people that benefited from this project. And another leg that we also had through the project was the backyard gardening. Next slide, please. So with the backyard gardening, we had 55 beneficiaries selected from all 3 of the conservancies, and each of the beneficiary received a water tank that they would use for their gardens at their houses. And they have also received pipes and connecting kits for the drip irrigation systems that they will put in at their backyard gardens. So apart from the water points that were rehabilitated during the project, we created employment opportunities for the community members because we were building dams, and there were 60 people in total that were employed during the project. There was also a capacity building aspect in this project where when we were introducing an activity, say for example, a poultry farming, gardening, for all this, before implementation or before handing over the equipment, training was provided to the beneficiaries. For example, for the poultry farming, the beneficiaries were trained how they would feed their chicken, and also what steps or what type of medicine they would, for example, use when the chicken is sick. And also the handling of the water points as well, since we were changing from diesel engines over to the solar panels. Members of the community and beneficiary farmers were trained on how they should turn on the water, for example, and up to what level it needs to pump, and for them to turn off the water again. So there was one person identified at that specific farm responsible for that water point, so that there wouldn't be any breakage. And the PMC and the technical support guys made sure that these people were well capacitated to use these water points. As I mentioned before, 48 individuals benefited through the project. And apart from the chicken that we have handed to the beneficiaries, we have also purchased 6 incubators for the conservancies, so 2 for each of the conservancies. And this is held at the respective conservancy offices, where local community people can bring in their eggs, leave it there for a set number of days, and in turn it could hatch and they could get more chicken out of it. And also skills transfer between the 3 conservancies. The conservancy, the project lead was the Kwadinghwas Conservancy, where I came from. So we were responsible for the administration of the whole project, although we were 3 conservancies that applied together. So there was more of skills transfer, because although we are all conservancies, every conservancy has a certain way of doing things. Every conservancy has a constitution that guides them. So it was a good joint project where we were able to learn from each other. Next slide. So we worked together with consultants called Nirvana. Nirvana helped us to draft the proposal to the Environmental Investment Fund, and they were also our technical support guys. Say, for instance, when we were purchasing the incubator, or when we were purchasing building material, solar for the water points, they are more the know-how guys. They do the actual work always in the conservancy area, and we know that they had the skills, so they would source good suppliers for us. And also they were the ones implementing the projects on the ground. All the construction work was done through Nirvana, because they have worked with the government or the Ministry of Environment and Forestry in the past, and they know what the specifications are, for example, when it comes to building protection walls around dams, putting up solar at water points. So Nirvana was our technical support. Next slide. And the Environmental Investment Fund. So before the inception of the project, we had an inception workshop where the EIF introduced the project to us, and also the project proposal templates to us. And before the call even went out, all the conservancies were called together and told how the grant facility would work. And throughout the whole grant process, EIF also provided the monitoring and evaluation training of the templates that we would need to use to report back the funds that we get from them, and also how they want the progress reports to look like when we have to give them back progress reports. And the part that EIF also played was that once a certain leg of the project was completed, they would have a site visit to the different sites. Say, for example, if there are 4 water points completed already, they would go to those 4 water points just to make sure that everything is done according to what it is supposed to be done. And we would also send our monthly reports to them, financial reports, technical reports, project progress reports to them. And the EIF was also responsible for the disbursements of funds as well for the project. So what went well in our project was that we were 3 conservancies, as I mentioned, but all 3 conservancies were represented equally on the project management committee. So there were 3 representatives from each of the conservancies, and the project had a totally separate bank account from all the bank accounts of the conservancies. And we had 1 person from each of the conservancies signing on the bank account as well. So there wouldn't be any bank transactions without the knowledge of the whole project management committee. And before even starting off with the project, we drafted guiding documents for the project, like the MOU between us and the Nirvana team, and also financial management guides that we, as the project management committee, drafted together so that we know how we would handle the finances, how much would be paid to someone, for example, if they go out with the EIF team to go for a site visit. And the other thing is each of the conservancy was responsible for selecting their own beneficiaries. So there was no way that I, as a member of Twadingwas, would go to Toronavas, for example, and tell them they should select Michael to be a beneficiary. And then there were regular communications between the project management committee, Environmental Investment Fund, and also Nirvana. And there was a clear communication channel. I was the project administrator, so anything regarding the project was communicated to me from the other stakeholders, and I would communicate it further to the project management committee. And the other thing that worked well was the flexibility of the project, because we faced a few challenges, but then EIF was flexible to make changes to our initial project that we had presented to them. Next slide. The challenges that we had, like any other project, was we have a really big and bad drought in Namibia, especially in the Kunene region. So once we have selected some water points, we experienced low water levels. And then this caused us the conservancies to select new sites again. And this took some time for the project to be implemented. And the project was implemented between 2019 and 2021. So as time goes, there were price increases as well. And these are rural areas that we work in. So the road infrastructure is not that well. So poor road infrastructure was one of the challenges. And change in management committees. So as I mentioned, each conservancy has its own conservancy management committee that serves for a certain number of years on the committee. For example, the conservancy that I represented, the conservancy committee serves for 5 years, whereas the next conservancy, the management committee, serves for 3 years. So if a conservancy management committee changes within the project time frame, it means that a new person now has to join the project management committee. And this would cause the project team to go back again, try to explain to this new member of how things were started and how things were going. So this was a challenge, although we were able to solve it by writing to EIF and asking them to continue with the project management committee and not getting new members on board. But these are challenges that might be experienced in other areas as well. And as I mentioned at first, the drought was a big challenge for us, because due to the drought, we had to change our initial project. We meant to buy drought-tolerant bulls, for example, for the farmers. But then due to the drought and the lack of rain, we had to resort back to the poultry project. Next. And that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorna. It was so wonderful to hear from someone so close to the project. It's often the case when working in the climate finance space that I do, that we hear lots about where the money comes from, and we don't always get to hear about where it goes. So I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to hear from you. And I think our colleagues have benefited from getting insights into what it looks like when this big mass of international climate finance eventually trickles down and gets to the local level. And the lessons that you shared from that are really insightful. I think lots more will come from the question session that we'll have with our fishbowl discussion later. So I know I've got some questions, but I'm going to hold them off for the moment and ask that everyone else does so as well, or note them down, and we can ask them to Lorna in the next session or in the next part of the agenda. So thank you, Lorna. For now, I'm going to hand over to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask that the SSN colleagues go ahead and just share the main deck for now on the slide with regards to the Kenyan Climate Change Fund. And I'm going to now welcome our colleagues from the Kenyan, two colleagues who have worked with beneficiaries at the local level in the Kenya County Climate Change Fund project. Mr. Sam Mwenda, who will be assisting and working alongside one of the project beneficiaries, Mr. George Mutunga. Gentlemen, if I can ask you to maybe put on your cameras for a moment and just say hello briefly, and then to save bandwidth, make sure we get a clear line with you. You can switch your cameras off. So over to Sam.
Thank you very much. My name is Sam Mwendwa. I'm speaking from Eastern Kenya. With me is George Mutunga. George Mutunga is a member of the World Climate Change Planning Committee in a county called Kitui. He will be sharing his experience on how they received and utilized county climate change funds at a ward level in his place. So basically, my work is to work with the local communities to help them identify, prioritize, implement, and monitor local investments. So George Mutunga, welcome. Introduce yourself and share experiences from here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sam. As he said, I'm George Mutunga. I'm a member of the WCCPT, which is the County Climate Planning Team. I come from Kitui, as it has been said. I'm a secretary in the ward. What was done is that we did elections for the World Climate Change Planning Team. The elections were done on ward level. And then after the elections were done, those who were elected from the villages sat down and elected officials. That's why I've said I was elected as secretary to that committee. Those elections were done back in 2013, and the composition of the planning team was that we had representatives from the physically challenged people, Then we also had women representatives, then we had representatives of the youth, and then the community also elected, or we had representatives from the church. That is how the committee is composed, and we have 13 members. After elections, then we were tasked with the community sensitization. Then where we had to walk across the ward, and also we did something which we called PVCA, where we identified needs as per the villages. That was back in 2013 with the help of the Anglican Development Services, Eastern. After that, we went for trainings. Thorough trainings were done with the county government in conjunction with the Anglican Development Services. We were trained on, and also we were trained by the Anglican Development Services and the under consortium on proposal writing. We also did leadership training, financial management, project management, CIS, that is climate change, climate information services through the phones. We went through all those trainings. Then after those trainings, we did a proposal development, and we had support from the technical team from the county government. County government is an involved unit in Kenya, particularly now in Kitui, where the project was being done. We did several proposals, then we prioritized, and finally we were able to do an earth dam in Mikuyuni. Mikuyuni is in Kaui Ward. So that is where the investment was done. Now after we had identified the dam, we did what is called the procurement process, the help of the county government and the ADC and the other consortium. After that, now the project was implemented in 2018. The components which were done in the dam were the desilting of the dam. Then we had a draw-off system. The water was to be fetched from the other side of the dam. Then we had a latrine which was constructed and also a cattle trough. Then the dam was fenced for security purposes. And that is what was done, the components which were done. Then within the process, what worked well was one, the bottom-up approach. It is the community themselves who identify the projects and prioritize them based on need, and nothing changed along the way. So what the community agreed was what was done. Then another thing was that the ward planning team was adequately trained to handle the project, as I had said before. Another thing was that the elections were not influenced, they were free and fair. It was the community who elected their representatives. Another thing is that during the implementation process, we were well guided. The WCCPT was well guided by the under consortium, the ADSC, and also the county government. Then another thing is that the procurement process was free and fair, and it was also very open. And the works was undertaken by those who qualified after the procurement process was done. As it is, we had several challenges, and one of the challenges was that We had inadequate disbursement of funds and support from the government and the partners. The other challenge was the need for continuous training of the project management committees. And as I said above, we had so many proposals and only one was undertaken. So there was that inadequate funding for the other proposals, which were also done. We also lacked capacity to the community, we lacked capacity to the community when it comes to implementation of the budget allocation by the county government, as far as the climate change interventions are concerned. Then the WCCPT, which is the World Climate Change Planning Team, is not adequately involved in public participation in allocation of the financial budget for the climate change. And just to cite an example, we have FLOCA, which is a World Bank intervention, which is still in the country and also in the county, and the climate change planning committee is not being adequately involved. Then the budgets, not the budgets, but the benefits. The communities benefited from the project. Like, for example, people were fetching water. They were using around 4 to 6 hours to travel and fetch water. But now, after the dam has been done, people are only walking for a distance of, let's say, 15 minutes to 30, and at most an hour to get the water. Then after that, we also have our cattle, which are getting water at a closer rate from how they used to get, because initially the cattle used to take about 2 days without water, but now they are getting water every day from the dam. I think that's what we have benefited from the project, and also those people around the dam have been able to grow trees which are nourishing well along the villages, which people are planted. Also, the trees they are planted, the trees to their homesteads, and they can fetch water from the dam and use the water to irrigate the trees, and it's working well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George Mutunga. That is all from our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And thank you very much to George. It was, again, very insightful to hear from project beneficiaries on the ground, especially in something as new as what was tried in Kenya with this devolution of the budgeting process from the national level down to the county level, and all the lessons that come from working within that new system. So I've been taking my notes and I'll be sharing them shortly. But what we would also like to point out is that we also have Mr. Kennedy Ododa from the Adaptation Consortium, who played a role at a slightly higher level up the food chain, as it were, whereas project beneficiaries experiencing in one county, there's lessons to aggregate across from the various counties. And so if people have questions of that nature, Kennedy's also made himself available in the next discussion. So if we can move on to the next slide, or the next part of our agenda for today, please. We'll be jumping into our discussion around, next slide, please. We'll be jumping into our fishbowl discussion. So as a reminder, the fishbowl discussion, the idea is that anyone on the call today can ask questions to others either those who were presenting or someone who might have brought up a point, and we will keep it rotating. So you can raise your hand when you'd like to ask a question, and our team in the background will be noting the order of people whose hands were raised, and they'll indicate to me who's next to join the discussion, and we will rotate through them. So you will be able to engage directly with any of the people who've presented today, as well as I said, Kennedy, who's available. And we'd love to hear if you have experiences that echo some of the sentiments that were expressed today, experiences that add to the insights from the participants, or if you had experience that was quite different. It seems in these cases, whilst there were challenges and lessons to be learned, the experience from these organizations, both working with access to some form of domestic climate finance in the case of Kenya, and the access to international climate finance from the GCF in the case of the Namibian project, both seem to have benefited from a few commonalities. And I thought I would just share some of those for us to kind of get on the same page. So I'm going to share my screen and ask if Lesego can give me a thumbs up if you see my mirror board. Okay, great. So some of the common themes that I started to note emerging were that both these forms of climate finance, when it came to accessing them at the local level, really required strong partnerships. And it was partnerships that exist both horizontally, so both amongst beneficiary groups, community groups, the cooperation between the conservancies in the case of Namibia, and the cooperation between different villages in the case of the Kenyan example. So that level of cooperation to put a project together, and then the cooperation up either to the level with regards to a municipal partner in the case of the county government, or with a partner such as the Environmental Investment Fund, who serve as an intermediary in the case of international climate finance in Namibia. That partnership was really critical. It would not have really been possible in either case for these organizations to access the funds if they weren't working with those partners. And then that partnership goes up higher. It goes into the partnership level between the national government and those providing the funds, and the role players in national government. In the case of international climate finance, we know of the important role we heard last week, at the last session, the important role played by the, when it comes to the Green Climate Fund, the National Designated Authority, that's the government focal point who liaises with the Green Climate Fund. And so that partnership is really critical. If organizations want to access the Green Climate Fund, they need to be able to manage that partnership. And in the case of the Kenyan Climate Change Fund, the various partnerships that enabled the whole structuring of that project to take place. And ultimately, what the partnership model really has proven to be successful in these two test cases is that they do enable a bottom-up approach. So they do enable that local level beneficiaries can play a role in designing the interventions they feel are needed. And this is particularly important for adaptation, where they are aware of the challenges they're facing. They're most aware of what solutions might be workable for them. And so that bottom-up approach has found some level of benefit through international climate finance and national climate finance, but it comes with various needs and prerequisites. And so some of those involve the cooperation arrangements. And we heard in the case of Namibia how it was important that cooperation was organized through the conservancy committees, which had their own structures, their own constitutions, and then through their own elections nominated representatives to sit on the project management team for that project that then applied for funding from the Environmental Investment Fund. So that cooperation was very vital. And similarly, we heard about the election process and the nomination process in Kenya in the villages that put together that enabled the team to come together to apply to the county government for the funding. And so it was important that these cooperation agreement arrangements are in place. Now, some of them can be put in place during the seeding of the project, the idea to come together, but some of them it's important and useful that they already exist. So the fact that the conservancy committees already had their constitutions was very useful, and that didn't slow the process down. And as was pointed out by George, it was important that the elections and nomination process were free and fair, and that I think is necessary for the cooperation arrangements to function. Then we heard about training and capacity building. This is a new system, and for local beneficiaries, working with putting together proposals is something new, I'm sure, for a lot of them. The implementation of the project could be completely new, the form of climate adaptation being approached, but then also the reporting and what is required to adhere to the requirements of the funders. There's a lot of capacity building that's required there, because local level beneficiaries are not necessarily automatically equipped to put together proposals. We know that when it comes to the Green Climate Fund, these proposals are incredibly complex and can take up to 3 years to be approved. And when you have an intermediary body who's able to facilitate some training, that's been found to be very useful, and that's what EIF was able to do, as Lorna expressed. The project from the EIF's perspective as the intermediary, they were able to provide the training necessary for the conservancies, so for those communities to be able to identify their project ideas and to articulate those in proposals. And so that partnership became very useful and important there. And then with regards to implementation, I think what we heard is that it's also important that these projects don't just be awarded and then the beneficiaries are left to find their own way through it, but that guidance is required throughout the implementation of the projects, and that role of the intermediary partners, whether it's the county governments who provide ongoing training on a range of implementation related topics, as George pointed out, financial management and project management really gave the team, the implementing team, the skills needed and provided continual guidance. And then importantly for implementation, this idea that the procurement processes need to be fair, because if the procurement processes aren't fair, then all kinds of mischief can be afoot. So with these kind of commonalities of experience, we could now maybe explore what other participants feel are both the challenges that come through some of these aspects. What are the opportunities for better access at the local level? What should be advocated for if you're going to make your voice heard as an organization? What is it that you need to say, and who do you need to say it to? So with that, let's have our first person joining the fishbowl. I see Fiona's hand. Fiona, over to you. If you like, you can put on your camera, but we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, hi, my name's Fiona Ryan from Forest Development and Climate in Australia. And I agree with Michael that it's so good to have, when you're dealing with the high levels of climate finance, to see where the money goes and how it has to be developed. So I asked Lorna, and possibly the Kenyan example too, at the high levels, they have been talking a lot about the word transformational and the word in the Green Climate Fund paradigm shift. Presumably that means that the project has benefits outside the project area, or they seem to have various ideas of what that actually means. Did that come up in your local level, in the applications? Did you have to include those ideas, what the paradigm shift was, or how it was transformational? Yeah, so thanks. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Brilliant. Such a good point, Fiona. This is something that ultimately, if funds need to be accessed at the international level through organizations like the Green Climate Fund, they want the intermediaries who are putting the proposals on the table to show things like transformational potential or paradigm shift potential. But these are notions that haven't been adequately defined. What does it mean for transformational change to take place, and what does it mean for a paradigm shift to happen? And your question is really well placed. I'd love to hear from Lorna whether, when you were making your application to the EIF, did they ask you to articulate or to explain what was transformational or a paradigm shift? Did they use that kind of language, or was that not something that they passed on to you?
Michael, so as I mentioned, our project proposal was mainly drafted by our technical partners, but then based on the information that we were giving them. And paradigm shift is something that came up in the project proposal as well as in the reporting, because they would always ask about it. I don't have all the reports and stuff with me. I don't have access of them. So I'll just have to check on the one that I have, because there was definitely a question about paradigm shift in that.
Right. So they did require that you speak to that notion of paradigm shift in the reporting.
Yes.
And maybe there was some guidance given in the reporting documents as to what that could mean. But I imagine it'd be quite difficult to indicate at the level of one project. As we heard from you, Lorna, the project benefited, for example, the provision of the chickens, for example, were 48 beneficiaries, and the backyard farming was 55 beneficiaries. And I think it becomes hard to speak to these high level notions that the GCF have around transformational change and paradigm shift when you're dealing with just this very local level, very impactful project to the people who are experiencing it, but very difficult to say that this is a paradigm shift. Was that something that you ever came across needing to try and explain? And did you find that there was a challenge in regard to that?
If I can think of a shift or a difference, I think that the project would have brought, or the project brought, was for the conservancy I worked in, or all the conservancies experience human-wildlife conflict. So, for example, the 4 water points that we selected as the Croydonhurst Conservancy are water points that were always reporting elephant damages and elephant conflict to the conservancy. And in turn, the conservancy was giving diesel to those farmers on a monthly basis. So selecting these farms for the conservancy was a kind of a savings for them, because they were no longer going to give or provide diesel to these farms. And also for the farmers as well, having diesel engines, it requires maintenance, and the distance that the farmers live from, for example, the fueling stations, the distance that they have to drive to go collect diesel just to come pump water, or for them to come together and pump water for themselves or their livestock and for the wildlife, because every water point out there in Kunene region or in the rural areas is shared with wildlife. So this project has really brought a shift in that area, looking at human-wildlife conflict and reducing costs of human-wildlife conflict in those areas.
Well, I mean, I think, inherently that sounds like there is a real paradigm shift there, for people in nature to be able to share resources in a way that's constructive and not destructive. But I guess it's a very hard thing to articulate. And sometimes I think what's harder is that the international climate funds want you to be able to explain these things up front, before, in the proposal writing stage. and that's quite difficult to do. But thank you for that insight, Lorna. Do we have any other questions that people would like to jump in on, either on this topic of the requirements around transformational change and paradigm shift, or any other new question to add to the conversation? I don't see any hands, and in the meantime, maybe I'll raise this one because I think it's quite similar in a sense. Is there's a need to be able to describe in proposal writing, and I'm sure this is something that maybe Fiona and George experienced. There's a very kind of technical element around needing to explain the climate rationale. What is the climate argument? And that's not always easy to make for some reasons. Lorna, was this something that you came across? Or let's go to George. George, when it came time to writing the proposal, what did the team experience in terms of being able to make that argument around an idea that they had, which they knew would benefit the community, they knew would have some positive impact, but did it easily fit into the requirements of the county climate change fund at the time, or did it require some adjustment, some finessing, and particularly in the way it was expressed or the way it was described?
Yes, I would say we really experienced a challenge because as you are writing the proposals, or rather, let me go back when we were doing the vulnerability tests. Then the drought was one of the major challenges or the hazard. We identified drought as the major hazard, but now, so all the proposals which we were writing were water-based. People were needed to have water sources, but again, we had a challenge of maybe relating a dam to climate change. We really had that challenge in writing, but with the help of the professionals from the county government, we were able to go through that, and it did not really hinder our proposal writing.
And can I ask, George, because that really is the crux, you know, if you needing to base your application on something as technical as a vulnerability assessment, sometimes the challenge is that before writing that proposal, one doesn't have that information at hand. And so were resources available, financial resources, to do that even before the project was, even before the proposal was fully developed or the project was approved? How was it that you could get the assistance needed to do that technical piece of work to articulate the climate rationale?
Well, there was some little funding from adaptation and climate change, whatever, which we used to do the vulnerability study to come up with the hazards around the climate needs. But the county funding now had not been in place by then, but we received technical support.
Right. Yeah. So there is
I can also add to it. One of the basics or the basis for designing the mechanism was to ensure there is predictability of funds that goes to the local community. So with the budgets being the focus, if that is done annually and a good proportion is allocated to the communities, the wards or the local levels have funds that support their routine operations in terms of discussions with the community, engaging them, conducting those climate risks assessments, because the key bit, as he has indicated, is capacity building. So once now there is that aspect of awareness, then they can support the communities to analyze their risk on a routinely basis, and identification and prioritization of the projects were based on available budgets. They become aware of the budgets that are allocated to them within a given financial year.
That's a really excellent point, Kennedy. Thank you for jumping in. I think that's something that the Kenyan project has really demonstrated, is that if climate finance isn't seen as something standalone on the side, but instead it becomes more integrated into the planning frameworks and the budget processes at a local level, then it becomes more predictable. Then it becomes possible to do the kind of assessments necessary to gather data and to put project ideas on the table. And so that's something that I think would be well that all organizations working on the local level could really advocate for. Let me take the next hand. Is it Majuma?
Yes, it's Mojuma Abdi. My question goes to the Kenyan team that presented. They talked about FLOCA, but I didn't hear exactly what they benefited from in FLOCA. I think Dan mentioned something on FLOCA. I was keen to listen what they benefited from. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sam or George, do you want to take this, or should Kennedy take this?
Thank you. Okay, Ken, go ahead. Sure.
No, I think he mentioned FLOCA as part of national funds that are devolved to local level. So you were just giving an example of FLOCA as part of the national funds going to the devolved climate funding systems. And also FLOCA supporting some of the local climate activities in terms of projects prioritization. FLOCA supported countrywide participatory climate risk assessments in Kenya.
And just for everyone's benefit, is FLOCA the financing locally led climate action program? So that's a program that was sitting above and enabling the creation of the devolved county climate fund system. Is that right, Kennedy?
Yeah,
That's
FLOCA,
right.
That's right.
And who made those? Who was financing FLOCA? Where did that project come from? Because this was obviously very critical to enabling eventually this devolution.
If you go to the World Bank site and look at the documents under FLOCA, FLOCA is a national scale out of the devolved climate finance as was piloted by the Adaptation Consortium. So FLOCA consists of grants and loans. So there is a government of Kenya part. There is a loan from World Bank. There are grants from other development partners like CEDA in it. So it's a pot that supports local actions, climate.
Okay, all right. So this is how other international development aid can, if appropriately directed, enable eventually the coming into being of a system like the Kenyan one. So interestingly, I think that's another. It speaks again to this idea of partnerships, and if a system like the Kenyan devolved climate finance system is something that people are interested in, then knowing where to look and advocate nationally to say, look, we want a system similar to this, and in order for that to take place, the national government need to form their partnerships, need to work with development aid organizations in order to access the funding necessary to create these systems, because otherwise I think they probably don't just happen, even if the examples out there, such as the Kenyan example, are a good one. Do we have any other questions or hands at the moment? let me go back to my list of questions whilst everyone is having a think. Well, here's one that I thought was interesting to ask, and I'll start with Lorna. Lorna, what this project came and has gone. What is this project and your role and your experience? What has it enabled for you outside, now that the project has come to an end? You joined the project management team. What has this meant for you in your career? How has it changed or challenged your experience going forward?
So for me, Michael, after successfully implementing the project and my role as the project administrator and the manager at the Conservancy, I joined Save the Rhino Trust last year in a new position. So I am now the Program and Partnership Development Assistant at Save the Rhino Trust. And I believe it is because of the skills that I have picked up during my years at the Conservancy, and also evidence of the projects or the work that I have done together with other partners in the trust that they have in my ability as an individual, that has brought me and opened this new door for me.
Congratulations. That's really wonderful.
Thank
Obviously,
you.
if the world really wants to see transformational change, needs a lot more of these projects and a lot more scaling up. And so very glad that someone who was part of a project that has come and gone was able to take those skills elsewhere, and that's really great. Sam and George, is there any experience that you've been able to walk away from that climate change project with, and how's that seen you into what came next for you? Sam and George, you are on mute if you're talking. Maybe they're having a challenge with...
Michael, can I add a comment while we are waiting for Sam then?
Yes, please do.
I'm not sure if you still have this question coming, but before it slips my mind, another thing that this project or the grant facility has done for the conservancies is that it's a project that we boast a lot about because we have implemented it successfully, and it also creates more room or possibility for the conservancies to access new funding from other people, because that foundation has been built and the conservancies has proven themselves that they can manage grants and funding that are actually given to them. So this has created opportunities for the conservancies so far to access new funding and partnership opportunities with other NGOs and support organizations as well.
It's a really wonderful observation. I think in terms of opportunities that climate finance can bring, I think that's a good one, and probably could go a long way if thought about from the outset. And I know colleagues at the EIF who I've worked with who told us that as soon as they started to implement Green Climate Fund projects and going through all of the technical hoops they had to jump through in order to get accredited, which we know is a big challenge, it did bring a lot of benefits, not only through the Green Climate Fund, but then once they were accredited, other organizations, other funders approached them and wanted them to take on projects. So I think it is challenging for organizations at many levels. I know that I'm sure it was challenging for some of the county government representatives to work in this new space. But once you have these new skills and experiences, other doors open and the work can continue in new ways that are probably unexpected and probably quite difficult to track and report on. So thank you for that, Lorna. I don't know if Sam and George want to comment, if they're able to come back in and comment. Maybe I'll go to Kennedy. Kennedy, I think from your position, you've had sight across many of the beneficiaries. And if you had to design a project going into the future with this opportunity in mind, what would you want to see included in the design of the project so that the benefits accrue not only during the lifespan of the project, but really empower people?
For me, I'm advocate of one program approach in terms of avoiding disjointed implementation to ensure that communities, the impact is felt at the local level. And also ensuring that the aspect of capacity building is enhanced in programming, because that's also a little bit in with also the M&E aspect at the local level. And also ensure that there is more of funding to support innovations, so that because climate change being not so much an old thematic area, it keeps on revolving. New dimensions are coming in. Its impact across different themes is also being brought out. So there should be action-oriented implementations so that there is a sustained funding for innovations.
That's really insightful. I think it's something that what I heard from Lorna's presentation and maybe the experience in Kenya was the same, is that you can design a project with one thing in mind, but the conditions change. And if the way the project is designed and the way the funders or the government is requiring you to perform is only exactly as it was originally conceived and doesn't leave room for flexibility, that can be a great challenge. But when there is an opportunity to be flexible, then you can find the innovation and the potential to do things that couldn't have been foreseen at the outset. Is flexibility in the project implementation is something that should be encouraged from your perspective, Kennedy? And what was that like for the county governments, who I think maybe were for the first time having to deal with something as complex as climate change, but then not just doing it as designed in the project at the beginning, but now having to adapt to that? What do you think that experience was like?
Yeah, Michael, yeah, that's true. Flexibility is critical in putting enabling systems for climate change risk management, particularly ensuring that communities are involved and the traditional ways and thinking is incorporated into the actions that we push as development partners. Also, flexibility allows tweaking of government actions to ensure that communities becomes part and parcel of the implementation modalities. And of critical bit was even marrying the climate, the traditional way of climate information forecasting to the modern way, so that communities can buy in and use that to build their resilience.
Excellent. I think that point was also, I think, made when we heard from George that the structure of the committees that was put together in his project specifically included the voices and representation from individuals that maybe without that specific focus wouldn't have been included. So people who are differently abled, as well as the youth. There was specific specifically required to include those individuals. And I think that's another important aspect to ensuring that there are multiple voices that drive the design and implementation of projects. So maybe I'll go back to Lorna on that one. Lorna, was there any requirements in the design of the projects to have a specific view on gender and social inclusion?
Yes, there were requirements, Michael, especially on gender. That's why whenever we were implementing an activity, for example, construction of the dams, we made it clear to the technical team as well, and the implementing team as well, that women needs to be involved, even if it's just 1 out of 5. There needs to be that involvement. And also when we were doing the whole poultry farming, handing over of drip irrigation systems, it was made clear to all the conservancies through their representatives that we should consider gender balance or involving women in all the things that we do. You are on mute, Michael.
Thank you. And so was that easy for the project beneficiaries and those involved to understand? Was specific training needed, and what do you think you'd advocate for in order to make sure that happens in a better way?
When it came to the other activities of the project, it was really easy because most of the farmers or most of the households at farms are headed by women, because men would usually go away from the villages working so that they can sustain their families. So it was really easy selecting female beneficiaries for the poultry project or for the gardening project. But when it came to the building of the dams, and because it's really hard labor, you have to push around wheelbarrows full of sand, full of cement. So it really was difficult. And at the end of the day, just for the sake of having them there, you would choose a woman, and then they would maybe go cook for the construction team, or you would really, at some water points, so you would find young women that were doing the actual job. But at some water points, it was difficult because that farm, for example, might only have a bit of older people living there. So it was really sometimes a challenge for that specific activity of the project.
It sounds, I think that's something that always comes to mind for me when I think of this, because when I think of gender inclusion, because I think in some way a project can be designed with one outcome in mind, and you can try and fit gender into it, and that would be called like a gender inclusive approach. But maybe with more awareness and more training, when the project gets conceived, there can be a more holistic approach, so that those roles that are more suited and can be of greater benefit to men or women can be done from the outset in the project design, so that it's not just that this construction project has construction jobs and now it's difficult to find a role for women who couldn't do necessarily the same physical work, but maybe that there's a broader aspect to the project. Okay, well, who's nurturing the children of the workers, etc. How do the roles that really speak to empowering people with their capabilities and such get included in the project design? But it's quite a sensitive area, because it's complicated, and I think maybe there's need for greater understanding and training to inform the project design phase. And in that way, that more holistic, inclusive approach could maybe be said to be more of a gender transformative approach, one in which empowerment is really central, like speaking to the strengths that that can be further enhanced and empowered. Do we have any other questions, any hands to be raised and to jump into the discussion? Any of the participants in the poll today who resonate with what's here, maybe see something as being necessary to add to the discussion? Don't see any hands, and I'm just wanting to figure out how long we have in this session. I've lost the timer for some reason. Let me ask Lesego. Lesego, how much time do we have left in this part of the session?
Technically, we still have about 27 minutes, but I think we can start wrapping up if there are no further questions.
Okay, so this part, so is we have 27. All right, I see, until the end. So yes, we're almost on time. Let me do a little summing up here before we hand over to our key listeners for them to give some feedback as to what they've heard today and to introduce some of their perspectives. So I think if we look at the lessons coming from these two projects, and I think they can be broadly seen to be relevant. There's a lot of commonality amongst them, but also some distinctions. And so when we look at the partnerships aspect and the complications around climate finance, I would think that there's an importance to being well-versed or being educated in what these structures look like that would enable access to climate finance, and to be able to be empowered to act within those structures, or to require that, or to advocate for government to provide more access to these structures. And in some cases, that could mean understanding who the relevant role players are in a country. So for example, with the Green Climate Fund, who is the national designated authority in government? Who plays that role as the interface with the GCF? And what is it that the NDA is planning on doing? And how can you advocate for some more level of inclusion and representation in the plans of the NDA? And then in terms of climate rationale and the idea that in order to be able to make a climate project, identify and make a climate project work, there's the need to be able to have access to funding to do some preparatory work. It's not necessarily always possible to come up with a project idea straight away and to have all the resources available. It takes time and money and technical skills to be able to put together these proposals, even at the level where it's a more direct route to access, such as the county climate change funds. Even in that instance, the technicality involved in making the climate rationale really requires that there's budget available to do the preparatory work before even making the proposals and putting the proposal together. So there's definitely a need to advocate for more access to preparatory resources. And in terms of the systems that are in place, making voices heard in terms of what is the national infrastructure, the frameworks, the framework for moving finance around for climate change action. What does that look like, and who is determining what that system is, and where can you try to have some influence in that system by articulating what is needed, and if what's needed is more assistance to shape that national system, then to have your voices heard in the design phase. And so to keep an eye out for where and how those systems are being discussed, developed, planned, and to have your voices heard, so that the systems that come out, the arrangements that are put in place, will really benefit the local level. I think skills was a big one to come across all of these projects, and it seems very necessary that training capacity building is provided not only in the project, although that's very beneficial and it allows for a future career path, maybe even beyond the project, but even before the projects, capacitating and training local level organizations to understand how to work within these systems is something else to advocate for. And then for the projects that are developed and the systems that manage those projects to enable enough flexibility and to be action orientated and to be responsive to the changing conditions, aware of the realities that climate change projects face. And so when considering what do the systems look like, what do the requirements of the projects look like, to have insight into how flexibility needs to be included in the design. And then with regards to gender and social inclusivity, there's a need for that awareness to be front and center when projects are designed, and so that they can be holistically designed. And again, this will require access to resources to do some of the fundamentals, some of the baseline assessments needed to understand the conditions, so that project ideas can be developed that address those conditions, and so that gender and socially transformative project ideas can be conceived of, and that gender and social inclusion aren't just added as add-ons at the end. So these have been really useful insights. They speak to some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities. And I'd now like to hand over to some of our key listeners who we're grateful were able to join the call today to give us their additional perspectives. So maybe I can ask Faith. Faith, would you like to say some words?
Hi, Michael. Unfortunately, I think some of them had to drop. I think there's been a lot of emergency meetings with everything happening, in the Middle East and in the rest of the world. So they've had to drop out of the meeting. I think we've had some very, very beautiful insights and conversations going around the challenges and all of the opportunities, as well as the structures, in ways that our beneficiaries have been able to access the climate finance, as well as the intermediaries and the different funds that have been set up. I wonder if we would want to get any closing comments or insights. If the speakers have any more comments they would like to make, I think that would be a good time to share some of those, or else we could go into wrapping up the session.
Thank you so much, Lesego. Yes, any closing comments from the speakers today?
I see we have a question in the question and answer box from Chinene F. John, and please correct me if I've said your name incorrectly. You can ask it out loud, or would you like us to read the question for you?
Ninya, would you like to ask us your question? I see it here, but it would be great to hear from you if you'd like and are able to come off mute.
Please read it.
Okay, happy to do so. So at the Fabian's Global Relief Initiative, our focus is climate change adaptation and renewable energy. We use the Y-Adapt resource as a result of a collaborative effort of Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center and others. Our long and medium-term goal is to get this incorporated into the school curriculum. We are challenged because we are not able to reach remote locations with our interventions because of funding constraints. Any ideas of what climate change funds available so that we can try? On top of our list right now is the climate change education and awareness. That's a really great point. If we really see so much of this has to do with a level of understanding and awareness at the local level, targeting the inclusion in schools of some of the most fundamentals around things like the climate change basics and adaptation is really good. I think it would speak a lot to transformational change and the paradigm shift that organizations like the GCF look for. And I think this speaks to this real challenge, which is how to access funds to make change when maybe as a small organization, you have a small footprint, you have a small focus area. How can you attract enough attention with a small project that would be able to generate or attract investment or the funds? And I think it really comes down to what we've seen play itself out in these projects is cooperation and partnerships, so that there's some aggregation, so that if one partner was able to focus on schools in one district because that's where they're from, that's their area of specialty, can you find other partners in other districts, other regions, to expand the idea, so that if you apply to your direct access entity for international climate finance, or if you apply to a fund that's been established in your government for climate change funding, it's not so small that they can't pay attention to it. It's not so small that it doesn't qualify, because in order to go through and be approved, projects need to be of a certain scale. The scale issue is a big challenge, because an organization like the GCF, every project needs to be approved by the GCF board. And so the GCF can't, there's just not enough time to be able to look at thousands of little projects. Instead, they need those projects to be aggregated together and brought to them as a package for assessment and approval. And so in the case of the EIF put together the broad project across many conservancies across Namibia, and it was the aggregation of those into one big project that could then be put on the table for the GCF. And Lorna was just one of the beneficiaries and represented one of the communities, or one group of communities involved in that. And I think the EIF's project was even broader than that, and they had different components. And so in terms of opportunities and how to advocate for something like projects to bring in education and awareness, it's about finding who you can partner with, and then approaching the relevant organization, like the designated entity for the Green Climate Fund in your country, and saying, this is this partnership that we have in mind. There are enough of us to make a meaningful impact. We really want to advocate that you work with us to put a project together and put a project on the table for the GCF. So bridging that scale challenge is very difficult, but it can be achieved, as we've seen today. I can go to Anawana. Oh, Anawana, unfortunately, we are struggling to hear you. The sound quality is very bad. I can't hear any of the words you're saying. If possible to chat to type.
Yes.
That's sounding better.
Yes, my name is Anna, Executive Director based in Sananga, Western Province of Zambia. And as we are already in the rain season, and rain pattern looks a little bit poor here. My question is, take project to be funded. That's all. Thank you.
Sorry, Anwana, can you just repeat that last part? What was the question itself?
My question is, and where I can see been going around the villages, and right now I'm deep in the remote. That's why the network is a little bit poor here, and I've been coming back to the meeting, and that's so nice. I've joined you. My question is, at finance, how long does it take for a project to be funded? Thank you.
That's an excellent question, Anwana. It really to take us back to this idea that one small project, if it is trying to apply directly for climate finance, it's unlikely to be successful because the funds can't pay enough attention to one small project. But even if it could, it would take a long time because any project to go through the approval process or the likes of the Green Climate Fund would take up to 3 years. But this challenge is trying to be addressed by the way in which this devolution is taking place. So in the case of climate finance from the GCF, there has been the devolution to projects at the national level by national designated entities or national accredited entities. So if an accredited entity has put a proposal in front of the Green Climate Fund to manage a fund of their own, so that funding from the Green Climate Fund devolves down to the national level, and that goes through the approval process and may take 3 years. But thereafter, once that the funds have been devolved to the appropriate level, it should be a lot quicker for access to the funding from local organizations because the funds have already been devolved. But maybe to give us a good insight into this, I can ask Lorna, when it came time to applying, putting your proposal together and applying, can you remind us what the duration of time was, how long it took to have that project approved by the EIF?
I would say probably a year, because it was first introduced to us towards end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And then our project started off in 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not too bad considering how much technical detail has to go into developing the project. And so, 1 year is a lot better than 3 years. And I think that it's only possible because the EIF had already received approval in the devolved funds that they were managing. So I think that system is possibly a solution to the scale challenge. But then what I would say is key to advocate for at the national level is that you have a national entity that is accredited, or even if there's a regional entity that can play this role, that is accredited to a climate fund like the GCF, and that they don't just apply for a complete project, but apply to manage a fund or so it's sort of a grant that gets on-granted. So they receive the grant from the climate fund and then they can on-grant. And so that's something quite specific that should be applied for. That's the one aspect through international climate finance. But I think what was well demonstrated in the case of Kenya is that if you integrate climate finance into the national budgeting process, and then it devolves to the county level and is integrated, then it's part of an annual process. So again, every year there should be a call to project proposals to make use of the budget that's available in that year's budget. So devolution can look like two different things, but it's important that it's taking place. And if it isn't taking place in your country, that's something that is a very strong point to advocate for. Do you have any other questions? Don't see any. No hands up. So I think, colleagues, we can begin to wrap up and move on to a closing poll for today. So if I can ask the colleagues in the back to display the poll and have everyone quickly answer those questions, and then we will close today's session with a few final words. Okay, so some of the takeaways. Sam says strengthening locally led climate finance is key in providing long-term climate resilient initiatives. That's such a good point. Locally led climate financing. I think that's a great concept. Goes hand in hand with locally led climate action, locally led adaptation, really locally led climate finance and its access. Fiona says that working at the UNFCCC negotiations, they don't often hear about the national government programs and projects. So I think that speaks to, this idea of raising voices and making your voice heard. And projects and programs like the VCA maybe can take on a role to bring those voices into spaces that can impact the negotiations, and maybe having your voice heard nationally and with any of the negotiating bodies is important. So learning what are these key opportunities to get climate finance to the local level. What does it need to look like? What is that impact at the UNFCCC level, where some of these mechanisms are designed? What can be advocated for to ensure more local-led action? Charlotte says the important role of capacity building in both proposal writing and implementation, and the need for resources and time for this. Absolutely. Shaninya says key takeaway is that partnerships are really important when accessing climate funding, particularly for small projects. Yep, definitely the case. And Fiona says the difficulty of devolving to the local level. I think it is difficult, and I think it really is something that needs to be learned from. All the experiences need to be examined and learned from, and there needs to be some level of flexibility as these devolved funding systems roll out. And then Lorna says landscape collaboration equals approval. So I think maybe she means that working together, and particularly in the context of a landscape that might be common to communities or to organizations, or in a landscape of collaboration, so where lots of collaboration is taking place, approval can happen. And we just have a thanks from Paula, and she's pointing us towards two very interesting experiences from Brazil in the Amazon Fund. So if you would like, there's a link there to a VCA supported initiative, so you can click there and learn some more. Thank you, everybody. I think that's going to wrap us up for today. Please keep your eye out for any communications from the VCA about where this climate finance discussion can go into the future, because there's lots more to learn from the experiences of one another, and hopefully that can have a meaningful impact when the voices all come together. So from me, thank you to all of our participants for joining, and specifically a thank you to all of the presenters at the first session and today's session for doing such a wonderful job of bringing your experience to the table. And I'll hand over to Lesego for the final closing.
Thank you so much, Michael, and to Kennedy, Lorna, and Sam, and George, if I'm correct. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your insights, your knowledge. This is very, very, very valuable information for all of us to take away and to build on. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email us at info@southnorth.org. And please follow all of our channels at We Are VCA on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And please subscribe to our newsletter to receive more information about our events. We're very grateful for all of you who have managed to join and take your time to listen to all the wonderful insights we gained from our speakers' presentations. Yeah, and that is all from us. Thank you so much.